And let's talk about animating. So if I want to animate this object, there's a couple ways I can do it. I can go into my attribute editor. I can actually choose any particular component or any channel, any parameter in Maya, and I can animate it. So that's really powerful. I can animate the position of this light. I can animate its intensity. I can do so many things, and I really want you to play around with these. I want you to, when you're working on your projects, to really, you're not going to be able to tackle everything about this city. So what are the most important elements of it? If the most important element of the city is light, then why don't you just infer what the shapes are and give us kind of, don't put too much time and attention into the shapes or the modeling of the city, but instead play around with a lot of the lights. So there's just different kind of experimental approaches that I would suggest that you maybe think about the way that you can render your city. Doesn't just have to be, I'm going to try to realistically visualize what this place looks like. Instead, you can maybe be more experimental or abstract with your approach. At any rate, so if I want to animate something here, here's my timeline at the bottom. I do want to double check, and I want to go to my Windows, Settings, Preferences, and Time Slider. And this is where I can make sure that I have my frame rate is 24 frames per second. I can see it down here. But more importantly, I want it to at least have a max playback speed of 24 frames per second. Some defaults are free, and you will not be able to preview what's going on in your end. It's going to play way too fast. So if you do 24 frames per second times 1 and play every frame, that's fine, or you can just hit 24 frames per second playback speed. This play every frame is really important if you're doing anything that's simulated, because anything that's simulated relies on the previous frame to be able to calculate the next frame. And sometimes your playback speed will be faster than the time it takes to calculate some of those dynamics operations, and so then you'll have Maya crash. So this is how you would, you want it to play every frame, but you want it to play back at the max speed is 24 frames per second. And then just say save. So down here in the timeline, this is the start of the animation. This is the end of our animation. We can change these numbers at any time. This is the start of the playback range and the end of the playback range. As you can see here, it's set between frames 1 and 120, which is 5 seconds of animation. And I can scrub through my entire timeline here to be able to animate, and I can set this to a higher amount. And if we're just going to go to my calculator here, and I'm going to say 24 frames per second times 60 seconds times 3 minutes is 4,320 frames. Okay, so if I set that now, then I have the entire playback range of my animation. There's so many ways you can do this. You know, you can make multiple scenes. You can render chunks of those scenes. You can edit them in Premiere if you would like. You know, there's other ways you can get to a kind of 3-minute average time marker for this project other than this, but this is the amount of frames that we're going to need at the end of the day. So if I want to animate any of the channels, I showed you this way to do it, which is to, you know, in my attribute editor here for this object, I can, you know, say I want to translate this, and I want to set, let me just select this object, and I want to set maybe this particular channel, so I can set a key, and then I can go ahead in my timeline, and I can type in a particular frame number here, and then I can set this key again. If I want to set all of the keys, you know, if I hit S on my keyboard, this is something that I didn't show you on Tuesday, but I can hit S on my keyboard, and that will set a key at every single value here in for my transforms. So I can do something like, I'm going to scale it, I'm going to rotate this whole object, and I'm going to scale it, and at frame 50 I want all of those parameters to be, I want to set keys for everything, then I would hit S. And now you see everything here is red. All of these channels have keys in them. I can do that. Then I can jump down the timeline to key 90 and then maybe move this object somewhere else in the scene. and rotate it and maybe scale it again, right? And then I can hit S and it will change, and it will set a key for all of those, for every single parameter in my transform tools. So I can, in my playback over here, my playback tools, I can rewind to the beginning. I can press play, play forward, and now it will interpret the animation that I've just done, right? It will interpret between whatever those keys I've set. Right now I have it on loop, so I can preview. And again, when I go to render this, it will render out an image sequence depending on the camera I have. So right now I'm in my perspective camera. Also remember, when you're modeling, you have these different viewport formats, because there are kind of 2D we have perspective, and then we have our orthographic, excuse me, front, side, and top. So these could be helpful if you're modeling, right? But we have perspective cameras, that's what we would render from. So I do have my perspective, I just hit my space bar, right? So I do have my one perspective camera, but I can add another camera to my scene. So let me show you how to do that now. The way I'm going to do that is by creating a camera. And there's these two cameras I might consider working with. A camera, just a camera, and then a camera and an aim. Let me just show you the camera. If I place a camera in my scene, here, it's going to show up in the middle of my, oh, I'm upside down. Here we are. It's going to show up in the middle of my workspace, and I can look through it. Let me show you with two side-by-side views. And then to change what view I'm working in here, I can go to Panels and say, look through. I can choose now my new camera, Camera 1. So now I'm looking through Camera 1 here in the left viewport, and here you can see Camera 1 in the scene. Let me zoom out here. And if I'm working with my camera, I can actually, you can see it moving in my perspective camera. So I can set where I want this camera to be positioned, right? By using the same left and command to move the camera to toggle, middle mouse button and command to pan, and then Alt and right mouse button to zoom, or mouse wheel, which jumps it. This is a smoother kind of way to dolly in and out, and the mouse wheel allows me to dolly in and out bigger. See how we're not really zooming, we're actually just moving the camera closer or farther away to the objects. So I want to preview what this camera is actually going to render like, right? So I'm going to turn on my resolution gate here. And now I see, okay, this is what it looks like, 1280 by 720, the renderable area of this camera. So I can set keys for this object too, right? I can select my camera. Let's say I want it to zoom through my space. I can set the key here. I want it to start here. Let me zoom back out. Let me set the key for this camera. I have my camera selected in my scene. I hit S. Now it's going to set all my transform keys there. Let's say at frame 40, I want it to zoom in and maybe rotate around. I'm going to hit S again, and then I want it to zoom out and be over here, and I can press S again. Let's preview the way that looks. Now I can preview the way that camera's motion looks in my scene here by pressing the playback, and now I can see a really kind of dynamic animation happening, where I have something going on with my objects and I have something going on with the camera too. So this is how I would model your scene, and then I would add some cameras to it, and we want to animate a kind of, let's say we want to animate a tour perhaps through your city. You want to animate the city, but you also want to animate the camera so it seems like we're moving through the city. We want to animate both. Okay, so then after I've done this animation, okay, which maybe I'll add some more objects to my scene. Maybe I'll just go ahead and add some spheres so there's more to look at. I also did want to mention that hitting Command D will duplicate a particular object. So if I want to duplicate these spheres a number of times, I can select all of them, duplicate again, duplicate again. Maybe I want to add a direction light as well. Go back up here to rendering, add a direction light. And let me see what this looks like in my render view. Okay, that's perfectly fine with me for now, right? And also remember that anything, this kind of blue is just for the workspace. It's actually going to be black when you render it out, which can be an alpha channel when you're working with it, maybe even in After Effects, and you can do other things to it. You can press play here, and let's see what my scene looks like. Okay, that's my animation for today. And I have, if I'm going to select my camera, I can select it in my outliner. Here it is. It's a new kind of object, camera 1. I'm going to select it, and here's all my keys. So it goes up to frame 80. So I actually want to render out frame 1 to frame 80 from camera 1.